Hi there! In light of recent developments on the CN side and Tololo's current limited banner rate up on the global server, I felt it was a good time to create a character guide for her. Tololo is one of the best single target DPS characters in the game and one of the main prizes of the standard banner pool. She was widely recommended as a reroll target before the game's launch due to her strong early game performance. However, the CN community's general consensus was that she eventually fell out of favor. The Hydro element received little attention from the developers and Tololo herself was held back by certain limitations in her kit. All of that changed just a few weeks ago, thanks to fixes that address these issues and the introduction of a new Hydro support. Now she's risen back to the top of the CN meta. In this video I'll be reviewing her abilities, rotations, the issues with it and recent buffs, as well as exploring her current and potential team synergies. Without further ado, let's dive in. Normally, when reviewing a character, I start with their first skill and work my way through to their passive, following the in-game skill order as if it were gospel. In Tololo's case, however, I feel compelled to begin with her passive, as it serves as the foundation for understanding the rest of her kit. Having said that, Tololo's skillset revolves around the accumulation and expenditure of confectance points. Unlike other characters, for which confectance is synonymous with skill points or ultimate gauge, respectively, Tololo does not actively make use of it. Instead, when her confectance points are maxed, she will consume all of them automatically and trigger an extra action. Note that her passive fills up her confectance index at the start of battle, which gets consumed upon her next attack, no matter which, even a normal attack, thus granting her immediately an opportunity for a double attack. The rest of her skill set is aiming to restore her confectance points in order to reactivate this effect, keeping the extra action cycle going. Note that this extra action is technically as if Tololo had two independent turns, meaning you can freely reposition her and all skill cooldowns advance forward by a turn. This is unlike the extra command you may be used to from Shakri's ultimate, which allows you to perform a secondary attack within the same turn, but without a change in cooldowns and no movement. However, this also means that all buffs which have a duration tick down by a turn. This is something to keep in mind when you are approaching your extra action. For instance, while it is generally good practice to use Zhaohui's shield last on your team's turn, using it just before Tololo's extra action would be even more of a mistake. As you can see from this clip, the initial 3-turn duration of Frost Barrier was cut down to a measly 1 turn due to Tololo acting twice after the shield was cast. Now that we have a good grasp of how the extra action works, let's continue with her passive. Another crucial part of her mechanic makes her gain a random buff for every 2 confectance points, up to 3 buffs when maxed. As you will see, her skills vary in their effectiveness depending on the number of buffs she carries, so this is an important detail to keep in mind. You won't have to worry too much about this though, as she is quite self-sufficient in generating buffs by herself. As you can see, she starts the battle with full confectance index and immediately receives 4 buffs, 3 of which come from a passive which grants her a buff for every 2 confectance points. It is worth noting that the majority of the buffs happen to be somewhat irrelevant to her role, as she neither cares for defensive bonuses nor for AoE damage. This randomness makes a reliance on these buffs for specific boosts impossible, and instead you should regard them simply as enablers of her skill set, with the occasional happy coincidence like this crit rate boost. Here we have another example of a disappointing collection of buffs, just to illustrate how little you should count on them. Note that the 4th buff is from her weapon trait, which grants her 1 buff so long as her HP is full. This trait is shared across all standard banner assault rifles and thus very accessible. Now the final part of her passive grants her the Light Spike buff, whenever she or an ally deals Hydro damage. This buff increases her crit rate and crit damage by 3% for each stack, up to 8 stacks, totaling a 24% crit boost. With her V5 this effect increases to 5% per stack, giving her a 40% boost at max stacks. Here you can see her triggering the buff by herself with a Hydro attack. Note that the buff has infinite duration and will stay for the rest of the match. Here's an example of Sabrina putting in the work, demonstrating that each enemy hit by Hydro damage grants Tololo 1 stack of Light Spike, making her a good teammate to quickly max out the buff. With that we have fully explored her passive, and the rest of her kit is pretty straightforward. Her first skill, Black Hole Inversion, is a single target Hydro damage attack, which restores 2 confectance points when it exploits a weakness. If you have her V1, it also ignores a bit of cover damage reduction. Note that the game notifies you when you exploit a weakness. Against this enemy, you can see we exploit both elemental and weapon type weakness, though either one is sufficient for the effect to activate. Now she gains the confectance points. Here's another example where she only exploits the weapon type. If you face an enemy without the appropriate weakness, it's preferable to avoid using her as one, as the 2-turn cooldown of the skill without confectance gain will delay your extra turn significantly. Alternatively, you can use Sabrina to set up Tololo's S1, since she can generate tideway tiles in the area of effect of either of her skills. These tiles implant Hydro weakness to enemies standing on them. As we've seen previously, this also helps stack up Tololo's Light Spike buff, and against tankier enemies she will benefit from the extra damage due to the elemental exploit. Now if you don't have Sabrina or don't want to use her, your option is to go with her second skill, Supernova Impact. This skill deals physical damage, but so long as Tololo carries at least 2 buffs upon use, she will gain 2 Confectance points and will also benefit from a 20% higher damage multiplier than her S1. Note that permanent buffs such as Light Spike or the Path Patrol effect of her weapon Planeta all count towards this requirement, so this should never be an issue. Even if you don't have Planeta, so long as your HP is full you will get a random buff from any standard banner assault rifle weapon trait. Note that with her V2 the skill gets significantly better as it changes its damage type to Hydro and also restores an extra Confectance point. This upgrade allows her to transition from the Phase Strike set to the Hydro Boost set and makes her generate Light Spike stacks with all of her skills. However, the additional Confectance point is not enough to speed up her extra action cycle, since using her S1 and S2 grants her now 5 points, and with the next skill you overshoot the target of 6 points with no further benefit. Continuing with her ultimate Morte Lumina, her attack with the highest damage multiplier up to almost 200%. In contrast to her S2, you are required to carry at least 3 buffs for the extra effects to activate, most importantly a reduction of its cooldown to 2 turns. Having 3 buffs at all times should not be an issue for Tololo, even without support from her allies, but just in case avoid using it otherwise, as a 4-turn cooldown will feel like an eternity. Note that unlike her other skills, the ultimate does not regenerate any Confectance points for her. This is important to keep in mind when planning her rotation, as you don't want to delay your extra action if at all possible. Tololo's ultimate receives 2 important upgrades with their dupes. With her V3, the damage gets increased by another 15% and more importantly, the cooldown gets reduced to a single turn when she meets the 3 buffs condition. This drastically affects her gameplay because she can now choose more freely between her 2-turn cooldown skills and the ultimate. I'll demonstrate this in the section addressing her rotations. A final upgrade at V6 fixes her lack of Confectance point generation so long as the ultimate can net her a kill. Remember that her V2 upgrade increased the Confectance point generation for her second skill from 2 to 3 points, so together with the extra point from her ultimate she can now speed up her extra action by a turn. Given the requirement to make a kill, this will, for the most part, only apply outside of boss battles, unless the boss spawns adds regularly. The only upgrade I haven't yet mentioned is her V4, which grants her a set of 4 powerful attack buffs at the beginning of her extra action. Note that these buffs last for 2 turns, so they will be active for your next attack as well. Before we move on to Tololo's gameplay and synergies, let's wrap things up by going over her fixed keys and gear options. Comet Tail increases her movement range by 1 tile during an extra action, which can be useful to bring her into position for her target. Principles of Observational Astronomy makes it so her first skill applies congestion to a target, a debuff which blocks healing. More importantly than the actual effect is the fact that this is an elemental debuff. So long as your Tololo is below V2, which changes all her skills to Hydro damage, you can enable the Phase Strike set using this key. Note however that the debuff is applied after the skill damage. And as you can see up here, there is no notification for the activation of Phase Strike. In other words, you will only benefit from the Phase Strike damage bonus on subsequent attacks. Invisible Light grants her a 15% attack and 20% damage boost during her extra action. This is arguably her best key and should always be equipped no matter what. Keep in mind that the buffs only last for her 1 attack during her extra turn due to their 1 turn duration. Retrograde Motion adds a stun to her second skill if a support attack is performed before Tololo's damage. Be mindful of this requirement as the stun is applied with Tololo's attack itself. So an assist from someone like QJ which follows up after Tololo does not proc the stun. Galactic Cruise adds a buff strip to all her attacks. It's a pretty situational effect, most likely seeing some use against bosses who cast dispellable buffs. Stellar Eclipse reduces the enemy's cover damage reduction bonus by 10% if Tololo is at full HP and max stability index. It's a pretty tough precondition for a rather minor effect, so either avoid entirely or run it only with Suomi at V1 and above. Her common key Afterglow grants her a 7% damage bonus when her Confectance index is not full. Remember that the only time it is full is at the start of battle. Afterwards it will automatically deplete itself immediately to trigger your extra action. In other words, aside from her first attack you will always have this damage bonus active. For her specifically, it's basically a permanent damage bonus. The game will notify you about its activation upon an attack. As you can see, we seamlessly transition from near full confectance index to empty without actually ever having full confectance index again. Continuing with her weapons. It should come as no surprise that her signature weapon Planeta is her best in slot option. It ranks among the weapons with the highest base attack and additionally grants a 25% crit damage bonus. Remember that her light spike buff grants her an extra 24% crit or 40% at V5 and above when maxed out, so it should be no problem for Tololo to crit most, if not all of her attacks. The weapon effect Path Patrol grants her a permanent buff which increases her damage by 4% after each kill or extra action, stacking up to 5 times for a total of 20% damage bonus. Once maxed, Tololo will also gain a few tiles of additional movement before her extra action triggers, allowing her to reposition herself. Note that the damage bonus, the number of stacks and the number of additional tile movement all increase with calibrations, up to a 40% permanent damage bonus and 4 tiles of movement. Here you can see how the kill triggers the first stack of Path Patrol. Next our extra action is triggered. We score another kill and finish our extra action, netting us another 2 stacks of Path Patrol. Keep in mind that the stack for the extra action is gained after you have concluded the action. As you can see, we are now at 3 stacks of the effect. Once Path Patrol is at max stacks, this is what the additional movement looks like. You'll notice that all your skills are blocked and only movement is permitted. This is because technically you are still within the turn in which you just made your attack. Only after you end your turn, your actual extra action triggers. Your skills are available again and invisible light triggers to give you your 1-turn attack and damage buffs. Now, as previously mentioned, the weapon trait states that you obtain a random buff as long as your HP is full. This trait is shared across all standard banner assault rifles and helpful for Tololo in maintaining the required amount of buffs for the conditional effect of her ultimate. Since you can obtain Planeta from the exchange shop, I'd highly recommend picking up at least 1 copy if you plan to invest in your Tololo. Other than that, if you have it, you can slap Golden Melody onto her. She gains a 10% damage bonus but has no access to support attacks. The model Alpha is usable, but it has a lot less base attack than the SSR alternatives, and the 10% damage bonus, or 80% at max calibration, only applies to her extra action, which she achieves every 4 turns below V6. Frankly, the QBZ-191 has a better effect, as Tololo will constantly gain buffs, thus the damage bonus will apply much more often than the model Alpha. Of course, if you splurge a little on the game, the Guerno from the Battle Pass is a decent alternative, though it has about 50 base attack less than the other SSR options. Its effect grants a damage bonus of up to 15% so long as your allies are nearby. It also grants 2 tiles of additional movement, so it's somewhat reminiscent of Planeta's effect. As for her attachments, we're dealing with the usual suspects. Because Tololo's damage is split between Hydra and physical damage before her V2, it's better to start out with the Phase Strike set. It is also quite stamina efficient, since other prominent characters like QJ and Chakra use assault rifles as well, so the Phase Strike pieces can be passed around quite conveniently. Once you obtain Tololo's 3rd copy, her V2 changes her 2nd skill to Hydro damage. From then on, her entire kit deals Hydro damage, therefore you should switch to the Hydro Boost set for the unconditional activation and the slight upgrade in damage. With respect to her substats, let me state the obvious: attack and crit as per usual. Due to a light spike buff, you may want to stop stacking crit rate at around 75%, or at around 60% if at V5 or above. Now that we've examined all the individual pieces of Tololo's kit, let's put them together to establish a combat rotation. Due to the conditions tied to her skill effects, nothing is set in stone, but meeting the required number of buffs should be no issue, so you only need to pay attention to the phase weakness of the enemies. To simplify this as much as possible, here are 2 heuristics to keep in mind. 1. Generating confectance points takes priority because you do not want to delay your extraction. The only exception is at the start of battle, where you start with full points. 2nd, Hydro damage is preferable over physical damage until Light Spike is fully stacked. This heuristic becomes irrelevant at V2 and above because then her 2nd skill also deals Hydro damage. On the right I'm showing you a typical rotation at V0, assuming you always attack and thus follow your cooldowns. The extra actions are highlighted in blue, the small numbers in parentheses indicate your confectance points after the action. As you can see, starting with the first extra action, it takes us 4 actions to arrive at our next double turn. Due to the cooldowns, you're basically shifting the sequence of abilities by 1 step each time you arrive at your next extra action. At V3 and above, your ultimate cooldown gets reduced to a single turn, so you can alternate between her skills and the ultimate more freely, rather than having only 1 available option due to cooldowns. However, before V6 you cannot arrive at the extra action any faster. With that said, let's jump into some gameplay for a demonstration. As you'll see, her playstyle is pretty straightforward once you've internalized the goal of achieving your extra action. I'll keep a quote-unquote timer in the upper left corner to keep track of the number of actions it takes us to cycle her double attack. So we start the match with full confectance points and 4 buffs, 3 from her passive and 1 from the assault rifle weapon trait. Because our Confectance index is currently maxed, we use her ultimate, as it does not restore points and it deals hydro damage in order to start stacking Light Spike. Now the extra action triggers and our Confectance points get reset to 0. We begin our action timer to arrive at our next double turn. Since we have a phase weak target in range, we can use her as 1, as it gives us another stack of Light Spike and restores 2 Confectance points, satisfying both of our heuristics. Then we use her as 2 to restore another 2 points. Now we've arrived at the dreaded downtime in her Confectance cycling. Both her skills are on cooldown, so we'll use her ultimate and bide our time. Next we had to reposition ourselves for a turn, so both skills are up. Normally you'd be using her as 1 here, but since we have the choice we can go with her as 2 for a little bit more damage, if you run the phase strike set that is, and the stun if you have the corresponding fixed key equipped. With this we have done 4 attacks to trigger her extra action. Our Confectance points are back at 0 and the cycling begins once again. As before, the extra action is our first action of the new cycle. Note that we never had to worry about her buffs, she is completely self-sufficient in maintaining an adequate amount at all times. Below V3, her cooldowns pretty much dictate her next action so long as you continuously attack. Starting with V3, her ultimate cooldown is only 1 turn, hence you can decide in a given situation whether a skill or the ultimate makes more sense. Just ensure that you don't delay your extra action unnecessarily. Only at V6 her rotation speeds up, because her ultimate will now restore 1 Confectance point upon scoring a kill. Together with her V2, which changed her second skill to regenerate 3 Confectance points, you're now looking at 3 action rotation to fully restore her points. In this match I borrowed a V6 Tololo. We started as usual with her ultimate, then we proceed with her as 2 to restore 3 points, next her ultimate for another point, totaling 4, and now her as 1 to max our Confectance points and trigger the extra action. We begin anew with her ultimate, now at 1 point. We use her as 2, adding up to 4 points. And finally her as 1 again, making it 6 points and triggering the extra action. To wrap things up, here are the rotations side by side. The V6 rotation on the right assumes that your ultimate nets you a kill. In boss battles this is most likely not the case, so either way, her main issue lies in the sluggish cycling of her extra actions. While you might think having an extra turn is a pretty busted mechanic, which can only be balanced by having it rarely, the truth is that in the right setup units with assist attacks get many more damage opportunities than Tololo. Since her only gimmick is a double attack, it shouldn't be so slow to achieve. And indeed the developers thought as much when they recently buffed her. With her new mod key, Tololo now gains 2 extra Confectance points with each skill use. This massively changes her playstyle, as she's able to cycle the extra action without any issues. Noticeably, you're also no longer forced to think about Confectance points with every move you make, and instead can just prioritize big damage. The second part of the buff addresses her rigid cooldowns. Since below V3 she is forced to pretty much adhere to the 2-turn cooldowns on all of her abilities. At V3 and above this will be less noticeable, as her S1 will be used less often due to its lower multiplier. I'll now be showing her updated gameplay using CN footage, courtesy of Ceia. I'll leave a link to his video in the description if you want to see it in full. As you see, she starts the battle using her S2, rather than the ultimate. Since Tololo is no longer overly reliant on her skills to generate Confectance points, it's preferable to time her ultimate with the buffs she gains upon her extra action. Right here you will see that she gained 2 Confectance points using her ultimate, thanks to her mod key. Using her as 1 she generates 4 points and triggers her extra action. If you have a V3 or higher, her ultimate will be up again for this extra action, benefiting from all the glorious buffs on this turn. Now we're already at 3 Confectance points, because her ultimate regenerated 2 points, and Springfield can apply a buff at V1 which additionally grants a point when dealing hydro damage. She now uses her as 1 and triggers the extra action. Note that even if the boss wasn't phase weak to Tololo, she would still gain enough points with Springfield's buff to reach 6 Confectance points this turn. This is pretty much the rotation at V3 and above, and you'll see the cycle continue this way. Use ultimate on her extra action to benefit from all the buffs. Use a skill to max out her points again, rinse repeat. With this, she gains an extra action every turn, and all you have to do is time her ultimate with the buffs of the extra turn. Moving on to her teammates. On the global server there are currently 2 more Hydro characters, Kolfner and Sabrina. While Kolfner does have an ability that deals single target Hydro damage with a low cooldown, bringing her to a fight just to help Tololo achieve on average maybe 2 or 3 light spike stacks before she is maxed doesn't seem like the optimal play. Aside from that, she has an assist which grants a 10% attack boost, but again there are better options out there. Colfin is a good healer, so if that's what you're looking for, go for it, but I wouldn't build her just to support Tololo. Sabrina on the other hand has great synergy with Tololo, as she can deal AoE hydro damage with both her skills, making it extremely easy to quickly max out Light Spike. For instance, as demonstrated here, each enemy hit will generate a stack for Tololo. Due to her passive, she also generates Tideway tiles in the area of effect, which implants hydro weakness to enemies standing on them. Hence Sabrina is great at setting up Tololo, since she ensures that her S1 effect can be activated even when enemies have no innate weakness for Tololo to exploit, and she also increases the damage non-hydro weak enemies take. The latter point is mute if you use Tololo's S2 before Heavy 2 upgrade though. As shown here, we are only in the second turn of this match, but thanks to Sabrina, Light Spike is maxed out already. Now even outside of her synergy with Tololo, I think Sabrina is worth building. She is a versatile unit which can fit into pretty much any team as a flex pick. Her utility is mostly defensive, though her counters can also trigger assists from units like QJ, which will contribute a good amount of damage when allies take hits multiple times per turn. I conclude this video with a sneak peek of the upcoming water units, focusing on the synergy with Tololo, since this is her guide. First, Zhaohui is an upcoming Hydro Vanguard character. She has great mobility and contributes a bit of passive healing for the team with the debuff she applies to enemies. In terms of her synergy with Tololo, she can help stacking Light Spike quickly since she has access to an AoE which deals hydro damage, and notably also support attacks that deal hydro damage. Aside from this though, she doesn't contribute any damage amplification until a mod key is released. With this however, targets on Stability Break will take 45% more hydro damage, making her a decent addition to the water team. Next, Springfield is the hydro support character everyone is excited about. She fulfills the roles of healer and amplifier with great effectiveness and plays a major part in Tololo's rise to the top of the CN meta. Most notably, Springfield has a single target heal whose overhealing is converted into a hydro damage boost. At V0, this buff increases damage up to 35% and at V1 up to a whopping 70%. So long as Tololo is at full HP, she gains the maximum buff effect. As you've seen before, at V1 she also applies a buff to the healed ally which regenerates extra confectance points upon dealing hydro damage. If that wasn't enough, she also applies a debuff to enemies which increases their hydro and stability damage taken, and with the appropriate fixed key implants hydro weakness to enemies she attacks. There's more to her kit, but I think you get the drift. She's completely busted. If you want to run the water team, she is not skippable. However, it will be a long time before her arrival on the global server, as she released in China pretty much at the time of the global launch. So if Mika doesn't close the gap between the servers, it might be almost a full year before we can get our grubby paws on her. This is also the same patch in which Tololo received her buff, so either way it's going to be a while before Tololo becomes a top meta pick. Having said that, she is even now a decent single target damage dealer. Knowing that she will have her moment in the spotlight, you can comfortably invest in her. If you don't have her yet, there's no rush really. She's a good pick for the standard banner rate up selector, which will probably arrive around February. Then you can slowly try and get her to at least V2 for the hydro damage change to her S2, or preferably V3 for the faster cycling of her ultimate. Grab a Planeta from the shop, and you're pretty much set for the Springfield patch. And that brings us to the end of Tololo's character guide. I hope you found this video helpful and maybe even learned something new along the way. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Tololo in the comments, and if you'd like, leave a suggestion for what else I should cover. In any case, I thank you so much for watching. See you next time.